Okay, now, this lady's traveled a long ways, folks, and she's tired. So give her a good reception. It's Ruth Weiss, and she's with the Election Integrity Project, and she's the Director of Education and Training. So,
thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here, and a real pleasure to hear different perspectives of this thing. I chatted with my own registrar of voters significantly about this and other things too, so it's really nice to hear what everybody has to say. I will say that every single question that we're not going to stand without the feedback. Every single question that you offered up just now in that Q&A session, I would like you to ask me too, as I have answers that I would like to give to those same exact questions, and I'm not going to remember what all that they were. But it would help for me to be able to use this to kind of remind myself where I'm headed. Normally I would come with a fully prepared, fancy PowerPoint presentation and all, but I didn't do that for two reasons tonight. Number one, I wasn't sure who my audience was going to be, because it depends on whether I'm talking to people who know a lot about the work we do or have never heard of us before, and I really wasn't sure what kind of mix there would be here. And secondly, because I knew that Donna was going to be speaking, and I didn't want to overlap what she was saying. I didn't want to get redundant or whatever, so I figured I would just bounce off of the direction that you want to go in discussing these items. I'll tell you very briefly, let me take an idea what's going on here. How many of you are fairly well familiar with the work of Election Integrity Project? Just raise your hand if you're fairly well. Okay, see, that's not very many. How many of you have never heard of us before? Okay, so we're starting at the beginning. I'll very quickly run through our history. We are an all-volunteer at this point, completely all-volunteer, nonpartisan citizen organization that was incorporated in the very end of 2010. The history is that there were several people throughout the state who didn't even know each other, who had gotten concerned that maybe things weren't coming out the way that they thought they should come out and what the polls were saying, that kind of stuff. So they decided to dive in 2010 and get involved with the electoral process. So they got in and they worked the polls and they observed the polls and they observed the vote count, and they did all these things to try to get an insider's view of what was going on. And we were very fortunate in California because California law allows the public access to every single step of the electoral process. We have a right to observe it. We have a right to ask questions about it. We have a right to object when we have a problem with what's going on. So we're very fortunate to be able to do that. And so we're taking advantage of that, because when those ladies did that in 2010, they were horrified at what they saw. Absolutely horrified. And at that point, they didn't even know what the laws were, but they could tell there were some really rotten things going on. So they said, we need to get together. Somehow they found each other and they said, we need to get together and form this organization, and we need to learn California election law. And then we need to find out what rights we have as citizens to try to work with our elections officials and to be more eyes and ears for them on the ground, and to report back to them and say, you know, I know you don't have as many observers out there as you'd like to have, and we would like to let you know what we've seen. And we do several things that have never been done in this country and are still not being done by anyone but us. Number one is that when we document under penalty of perjury. Every single incident report that is filed by our observers is filed and signed under penalty of perjury. That means they are admissible in a court of law. So this is not hearsay. This is not where we just sort of give anecdotal stories after observing an election. The California environment did not lend itself to that kind of looseness. So we started out absolutely verifying everything and we have now 6.5 years, stacks and stacks and boxes and boxes. We've trained over 7,000 citizens in the state of California to observe the polls and to observe the signature counting or matching and other parts of the electoral process. And when they see something that they feel has, crossed the line legally from the training, we give a very thorough training. Our training is at least 4 hours long, and so we really do train our people in the election law. We have really good materials for them to have and to review and to go out and to refer to. So what we do is very trustworthy, and we have been told by J. Christian Adams. You may recognize that name. He's all over the news all the time. He's probably the preeminent election law lawyer in the United States. And he looks at our stuff and says, this is impeccable. It's absolutely impeccable stuff. So when we put out percentages, when we put out information to you, you can trust the numbers that we're putting out, because we're also very conservative about the way we do that. When we do research the voter rolls, and then we try to share with the registrars and say, well, this is what we have found on your voter rolls, people who shouldn't be there. Would you take a look at it? And then in some counties, we've had a lot of cooperation. In one of the counties up in this area, the registrar said, well, we have a really great system, and I don't understand why yours came out so differently from ours. And so she said, how are you doing this? So we taught her how we were doing our research of the voter rolls. And she has now adopted our method because it was much more accurate than the one that she had. Everything we present to the registrars is at 98% probability. We don't give them the possibles or the, we go for 98%. So when you see us put out numbers, which we did a couple of weeks ago and we will be doing in the future, you can trust the numbers that we're putting out. I will not be offended if you take your smartphone out right now, if you do it for the purpose of going to our website and signing up to receive our emails. It is vital that everybody get our emails. We don't send them out very often, but when they do, these are things you need to know. And recently we've sent out a few things. We just sent out one that you might be interested in, because you've been talking about voter turnout. Somebody asked about voter turnout, and in some places it's rather abysmal. Well, the voter turnout is simply determined by a formula. The number of people on the active voter rolls versus the number of people who cast a vote in any given election. So if there is a great deal of what they call deadwood in your voter rolls, that's going to make your voter turnout look a lot more dismal than it really was. So what we have done is gone through now using the new database that finally, after 14 years of being out of compliance with federal law, California now has that voter database, although it's very new. And as my registrar says to me, it needs to mature. Don't put a whole lot of faith in it yet. It needs time to work out the kinks. And what we have found a couple of major kinks in it, which would imply it should never have been certified in the condition in which it was certified. So there are still problems with that voter database. But we have taken that base and done the last research that we did, and this is going to be coming out very, very soon in a national way. We have 8 counties in the state whose registration rate is over 100% of the people who are eligible to vote. Okay. Now, there's a lot that goes into that because, as Donna pointed out, the voter rolls are always in flux. They're very fluid. You have people being moved constantly from active to inactive, and then federal law requires that they stay in that inactive state for 8 years before they can remove them, and then I think the law says they may remove them instead of must remove them. So federal law is really getting in the way of clean voter rolls. California used to have very clean voter rolls because of the way we did it. And then in 1994, when the National Voter Registration Act was passed, clean voter rolls went out the window. And I'm really kind of sad about that. So it's not, in my county, San Diego County, by the way, I was giving the history of EIP, and then I got mixed up and talking about other things. But we now are rebuilding teams in a lot of counties, and I'm hoping we'll build a very strong team up here in these counties, and we need you to step up and be part of starting that. So if you want to explore in any way how you can be part of that and help make that happen, please leave your name and contact information with me tonight so I can contact you. We need to rebuild some of these teams. We had really strong teams in 40 of the 58 counties in 2012. And most of them in 2014, and we represented 85% of the California voters with a team in their county. But unfortunately, a lot of people have moved out of the state of California because they've thrown up their hands and said, I can't live here anymore. And so we lost a lot of our leadership in a lot of counties as a result of that, and some of the teams kind of fell by the wayside. So we're trying to rebuild those teams. We still have a very strong team in San Diego County. That's always been the strongest team that we have. And we are building some very strong teams in Los Angeles County. And those two are the two problematic counties because they're large, right? And I was saying what a luxury it must be for you to have a small county, because a lot of things can work in a small county that just can't work in a big county. And so we're the two large counties, and LA is by far the most out of compliance county in the state of California, and it's got fully 1/3 of the voters in the state of California. So we've got Los Angeles as the tail wagging the dog, and until we do something about LA, the rest of us are basically out of luck. So we are focusing on Los Angeles, and the information that's going to come out in a week or two will make your jaw drop to the ground, because they are supposed to be in a lot better shape than they are right now. We had presented to them in 2012 over 60,000 anomalies. Remember, this is only at the 98% probability rate. We had a whole lot more that we were pretty sure were also anomalies, but we only presented the ones we could be positive about. And there were 60,000 plus on the rolls in LA, and they wouldn't talk to us. They completely slammed the door. Until 2015, when the California Advisory Committee to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights looked at our information and decided we got to hold a civil rights hearing, because this is the #1 civil rights violation in the state of California, is that the voting rights of legitimate citizens are being violated by the mess in places like Los Angeles. So we had a full day of testimony, and we really were able to make our point. Prior to that hearing, once the registrar in LA realized that he was not going to be able to get out of testifying for his county, they did some cleaning, and they contacted us and said, could you send that again and that again and that again? We can't seem to find it, which of course tells me we gave it to them and went right in the round file. They never looked at it the first time. So we obliged, and we resent the stuff. They removed over 30,000 deceased and over 30,000 duplicates. Some people duplicated up to 7 and 8 times in the same county before that hearing. And that's very much the tip of the iceberg. They have since stopped doing the kind of research that led to those removals. So we are about to hit them again with some information. And this is why now, after trying for 6 years to work within the system quietly with the elections officials in counties, rather than splashing things on the newspaper and saying, guess what we found in LA County. We didn't want to do that. We were not a gotcha organization. We very much wanted to work within the system and help. We met with the Secretary of State. We did all these things. We have been summarily ignored, and so now it's time to take it to you. And so that's why it's important that you get on our email list. Right now, the website is electionintegrityproject.com. We're in flux with our name right now because we're changing from a for-profit corporation, which we had to do in 2010, because if we had tried to become a nonprofit in 2010, we still wouldn't be having our ability to operate, what the political situation was then. So our attorneys suggested that we file as a for-profit corporation so we could begin to do our work. We never made any profit, and we have never paid a penny to anyone who's worked for us, other than we did pay a small pittance to our website person at first, and of course we do have some legal fees that we pay to some attorneys we had to engage. Other than that, nobody gets paid. It's all a labor of love in order to try to turn California around. But now we are finding, we are so very hurting for money. Our president, Linda Payne, is a hero. She's my hero. She and her husband actually mortgaged their house in order to keep this organization going, because there was no money. And so we're now filing as a nonprofit tax exempt, so that we can be eligible for some of the funding that people can give to tax exempt organizations and cannot give to for-profit organizations. And I just learned a few minutes before I got here today that the state of California again is playing games with us. So we've got a legal thing going on. But anyway, we'll straighten it out. So for our initial filing, we now have to file under the name Voter Integrity Project of California. And then we will after we get that process done, then we will simply file an amendment to our name and we'll go back to being electionintegrityproject.com. But don't get confused if you see Voter Integrity Project coming in there, because that'll be there for a little while. Anyway, where was I heading after that? I'm going to start looking at some of these. I want you to look at the name of this act, and I will not call it that. I will call it SB 450, because the name they gave it, like most legislation, is completely the opposite of what it is. It is not a voter choice act. It removes a lot of choice from voters. It takes away my right to cast an in-person ballot, which I'm going to follow up on what was said right at the beginning of the meeting. And I said, gee, I didn't know anybody still felt that way, but it's the drum that I've been beating now for 6 years since I've been working with Election Integrity Project. When you walk in and cast an in-person same-day ballot and put it in a sealed box, it's transported, still sealed, back to the counting center. It's taken out of that box and run through the machine and counted, assuming the machine is legitimate. That's the only way you know your ballot is counted the way you cast it. If you are voting in any other way, there's always room for error, negligence, and fraud. And if I had 3 hours or more, I could begin to touch the surface of how these ballots are being manipulated. But the legislature has gone overboard in pushing people toward voting by mail and making us believe, it's like, hey, look over here, it's all okay, and keeping us from seeing over here why it's not okay. And so these people that are by choice choosing to vote by mail, it's because they don't know the truth about what can happen with their vote by mail ballot. Then on top of that, the legislature has been passing laws to loosen a lot of the restrictions on the vote by mail ballots. Now, a couple of laws that they passed last year are thanks to our own Lorena Gonzalez in San Diego area, her bill 1921 now basically legitimizes ballot harvesting, allows it and encourages it. So my concern is for people who belong to unions, people who are students in colleges who are now going to be much more easy to manipulate by using the vote by mail ballot to do that, because you no longer have to turn in your own ballot. You can turn in a stack that big if you want to, and nobody's going to ask you whose they are. And I have a problem with that. I'll also understand that if a vote by mail ballot in the process of being handled, the more you handle something, the more it wears out, right? In the process of being handled, if it goes through the U.S. Postal Service, or if it goes from drop-off box to, whatever, and being handled through the signature verification process, if it gets crinkled or crumpled in any way, it's not going to go through the counting machine. So now we have to do what they call remake the ballot. And then you have to trust that the people remaking your ballot aren't going to make a mistake or be dyslexic or, maybe worse things. So, yeah, and I don't want to impugn the process. I believe that most people working with your votes really are doing their utmost to make sure everything is fair and honest, and I'm not saying it's not. But the fact of the matter is we don't know. Okay, when you cast a vote by mail ballot, you have no way to know that it was counted the way you cast it. When we had a recount last year in San Diego, we went through all of the provisionals and all of the vote by mails, and they have to hand inspect each one of those ballots. And then if the voter made a stray mark, or I'll use the wrong pen, or didn't fill something in right, they go through and they mark it, and they use whiteout, and they have to do their best to figure out what was the intent of the voter. And so that was real disturbing to people watching that recount, because wait, what are you doing? There was that whiteout all over that one, so they had to scrape the whiteout off of there to make sure that the voter's intent was correctly, all of that can happen when you're not just casting a same-day here ballot, okay? So this Voters' Choice Act takes that away. I have to cast a vote-by-mail ballot of some kind. I have to cast an envelope ballot of some kind. I have no more opportunity just to cast that safest ballot possible. So I have a real problem with that. How do you advance this? Oops. Ah, thank you. Okay. Okay. Okay, about the drop boxes, The drop box is something that has been allowed in the county. It's not new with this bill. It's been allowed in counties for quite a while. My county was talking about it starting in 2012, and we began to work with the registrar in 2012, and then when we got a new registrar, we continued that work, and we said, if you're going to have drop boxes, then we want to make sure that they're going to be legitimate, because we knew that there were some counties in other places in the state where all they had done was taken a box, like a little mailbox thing, and they had wired it to a lamppost. No one was watching it or anything, and people could just come and stuff their ballots in there or take ballots out for all we knew. And so we thought, no, this is not happening. This has got to be a secure procedure. And as Donna said, the Secretary of State is now creating a secure procedure, but he hasn't even created it yet. This procedure's been allowed for several years, and he's not required to have the procedure in place till the end of this year. So each registrar was doing, his or her best to figure it out, and some didn't have the drop boxes. We started our drop box program November of 2014 was the first time we had it. And we made sure that we had lots of input. Here's what we want, here's what you have to have, here's the kind of security we want to see. And then we went out and observed the drop boxes and had people report back. So when I went to see my registrar and I said, your drop box situation is working very well. This is what we liked. We'd like to know if you can fix this. He was stunned. He says, you observed that too? And I said, how long have you known me? Yes, we observed that too. So we have a really good drop box program, and you can have a really good drop box program here. Even though you don't implement 450, please understand you can still do that. And it's been really popular in San Diego because people who do have a vote by mail ballot are not comfortable sending it to the US mail. I wouldn't be either. And so it's nice that the only other option they would have, as Donna pointed out, would be either to take it to the polls on election day and turn it in, or drive it all the way to the registrar of voters office in the county and turn it in prior to election day. But now they can turn it in 10 days before election day by taking it to a very conveniently located community drop box, and that's been a very popular thing. Our drop boxes are secure. They're in county buildings. They are staffed by 2 people from the registrar's office at all times. They are picked up every night securely by people from the registrar's office, and the box itself is locked up at night in that county building. So we feel very comfortable about the security of that. So it's not really part of this bill. It is part of the bill. Then if you go vote center, you also have to have the drop boxes, but the drop boxes you may have even without implementing this bill. And it's a really good thing to do. It's been very popular. I lost it. I wanted to ask too, did I understand you correctly that in a county where the registrar is elected, then it's the registrar's, whose decision is it? You said in your county it's your decision because you're elected, is that right? But if your registrar is appointed, then it's going to be the county board of supervisors. Or new equipment to do it. Okay, gotcha. Because I wasn't quite sure whose decision this was going to be. So, okay. And it's nice that that people are being asked for their opinions, and I really respect the fact that you're out and explaining this clearly to everybody and letting everybody kind of let it soak in to decide what will work best for each county. The beginning of this, as far as I understand, is that this is a child of Alex Padilla. He has been absolutely... This is the only thing he's, beating one drum. This is what he wants, this is what he wants, this is what he wants in the state of California. And so he immediately after earning the position or being elected, went to Colorado with a group of people from the Secretary of State's office because Colorado has this model. And they studied it and then came back and said, we got to have this here, in California. And that was the impetus. And it was actually, he was the one who was involved in creating this bill to then go through. But we in Election Integrity Project are getting lots of contacts from people in Colorado saying, help. This is creating more fraud. We can't trust our elections anymore. We're horrified by this whole vote model situation. So in Colorado, the people who are keeping an eye on it aren't real comfortable with it, just so that you know. I'm going backwards, aren't I? Okay, so I made my point about voter turnout. The voter turnout is directly related to how healthy your voter roll maintenance is, and so you would have to check on that, of course. I'm still going backwards. Okay, I wanted to comment on this one. In the current model, polling locations are open only on election day, and a voter would need to go to the polling location assigned to them. That's not correct. They should. They should go to the voting place that's assigned to them because it's the only place they're going to get the correct ballot. But California allows what's called convenience voting, which means you can go and vote anywhere you want to vote. And you'll get the wrong ballot, but as long as you don't care, you'll fill out that ballot, and it'll be a provisional ballot, and you'll send it in. And there's 2 reasons why that would be a bad thing. Number one, well, 3 reasons. Number one, it's an envelope ballot, and it's going to go through all kinds of manipulation. Number 2, it's going to have to be remade or somehow whited out because you're casting votes you're not entitled to. And then you've disenfranchised yourself by taking a ballot that doesn't have some of the things you are entitled to vote on because you crossed a precinct line, and that could be pretty important. And I think that's more important than convenience, but we've said, oh yeah, go vote anywhere, it's okay, and they hand them out like candy in my county. You know, they practically twist your arm. If you show up at the wrong place, oh, it's okay, just vote this way. And that's a poll worker training problem we've discovered in EIP, because once the observers tell them what the law is, they go back to following the law, and then they're upset that they weren't trained properly. So training is another issue in the state of California for poll workers. But you don't have to go to your polling place now. You can go anywhere you want to. You're just, casting a less secure ballot. But the other reason it's a bad idea is that then all day your name is sitting there in your own polling place unvoted because you chose to vote over here. Somebody can come in and vote for you because they don't have to prove who they are. They just walk in and give your name and address, and they have to give that ballot to you. And so that means that that vote counts, and yours will be thrown out if you've voted provisionally in a place other than your own polling place. So it's not a wise choice to do, but California law allows it. And when we talk to secretaries of state in other states, they are dumbfounded at what California allows. They just go, how can you have a fair election when you allow that? They're really stunned. In most states, there's only 1 or 2 reasons for casting a provisional ballot. Wisconsin, for example, they have same-day registration. You cast a provisional ballot if you show up to register the same day and you don't have the appropriate ID required. Then you cast a provisional ballot. You've got until the end of the voting day to bring that proper ID back and get your ballot out of hock. Or you have till the end of the week to go to the election center, to the clerk's office or whatever they call it back there, and provide that ID. Period, the end. Otherwise, you go and vote where you're supposed to vote. Same thing Mississippi and other states. And California just says, here, let's just, it's like trick-or-treat candy. Just vote anywhere you want to, and let's all have a free-for-all. So that's a real problem here in California. We need to talk about that. And true, the voter can go to a voting center in any county and get the correct ballot. That's a plus for a voting center. The problem with that, as I see it, is that you're going to have to rely on the technology to be up and working. And how many of you have had problems with technology almost on a daily basis at home? I'm concerned that technology could wind up being a problem there. Okay. Also, understand that counties have the same-day registration that we now have. What did you call it? Conditional. Yeah, it's basically the same-day voter registration that was passed in 2012 or 2013, but couldn't be implemented until we had the statewide voter database. When you register right now, as Donna said, you would have to go to your county office to register same day. You couldn't do it at your polling places. However, the law allows counties to set up satellite centers for that same-day registration. So if you had a larger county, you wouldn't be restricted to just having same-day registration at the county office. You could set up satellites throughout the county and do that without having a vote center model, and so you could still do that. One more time, I want to go back to the number of people voting by mail. The legislature has continued to pass laws that are requiring more and more people to be forced to vote by mail whether they want to or not. Right now, or not right now, prior to this year, the law said that if you reside in a precinct in which there are 250 or fewer registered voters, then you are all vote by mail in that precinct because it's not financially feasible to set up a polling place with that many people. This law SB 450 ups that to 500. So now, if you are in a precinct with 500 or fewer registered voters, you will automatically have to vote by mail, and that's whether you're on the vote model center or not. Vote center model. I always turn those around. And I'd like to compare some research, because the research that we have done shows there are 4 states now that have all vote by mail. They just vote all by mail, 4 states. And their research shows that it does not do what the proponents of all vote by mail say it will do. Number 1, it does not increase voter turnout. Number 2, it is not cheaper. And they all sell it that way. But it has not turned out that way for Oregon. It has not turned out that way for Colorado. It hasn't turned out that way for Louisiana, and I think the other one's Washington. So I'd like to see more research to see what those statistics really are, because it doesn't turn out, because the money we're spending voting the way we are voting now just winds up getting spent on the other end with incredible large amounts of printing and reprinting and postage, and now somewhere tucked in either this law or one of the other laws, I forget in which, we now have that the county has to pay your postage. You no longer have to put your stamp on your vote by mail ballot. So that we're just continuing to put the money, we're moving it to another pocket, but we're not making it cheaper, okay? And right now, if you're a vote by mail person, you will have your ballot mailed to you 29 days prior to Election Day, and you've got all that time to submit it in whatever way that you decide to submit it. But also keep in mind that doesn't mean if you're a poll voter, it doesn't mean that you can only vote on Election Day, because California has early voting, which starts when? 29 days before Election Day, which means you can show up at your county registrar of voters office and vote in person 29 days in advance of Election Day if you want to, in person. Now, that's not really the same as an in-person vote, because what you're doing is showing up at the office and filling out a vote by mail ballot and putting it in an envelope and submitting it without requesting one. So, but you can't. You're not limited just to Election Day if you keep the model that you already have. So that was my response to this slide here. So I think I've pretty much talked about most of the rest of the stuff in the way that we're looking at it. Yeah, and then when you look at not only the requirements to make the switch over and to make sure that the public gets informed of all this new stuff through all this way, then the responsibility of the registrar's office to report statistics phenomenally back to the registrar of voters so that they can, to the Secretary of State so that they can create reports. And the idea is, remember, this law is called the Voters' Choice Act. And what they're trying to do is use all those statistics to prove to you that this is what you wanted all along by taking away the choice you may have wanted and then not counting that in the process. And well, that's how they wanted to vote anyway, because that's the way they did vote. Well, yeah, because you didn't give them that choice anymore. So it's a little disingenuous to call it the Voters' Choice Act. And it's clear what the agenda is. And in our perspective in Election Integrity Project, the agenda is to have everybody voting by mail, which opens the doors wider and wider and wider to lack of integrity in the election, because you just cannot guarantee. In fact, there were several, Trump's election commission is not the first one that's ever been convened. Did you know Barack Obama convened one? Did you know that Jimmy Carter convened one? They've been convened, and nobody said a peep about them until now, okay? So I have to ask, what do you have to hide if you have a real problem with us looking in and finding what the truth is? They're putting out numbers that 45 states are not going to be able to cooperate, that the 2 secretaries of state on the commission are not going to be able to send their stuff in. That's only partially true. There are only 14 states that right now, and California proudly is one of them, saying, no, we're not giving you anything. But the rest of the states are doing exactly what the request letter said. To the best that your state laws allow you please send us this information. So if there's anything we're requesting that your state laws don't allow you to send, then don't send that part. Send what you can. And that's what these other people are doing, and that's what Chris Kobach's state is doing. It's not that they can't send anything. It's there's some information they cannot send. I want to address, too, before I start taking questions, the question of the DMV sharing its information with Secretary of State's office. When this law was passed in 2015, AB 1461, which is the new motor voter law, up until the very, very last second, the law included language that did require that the DMV information, because the DMV is the only place that has a database of who's a citizen and who's not. Because you have to prove your citizenship and your residency status in order to get a driver's license or an ID card in the state of California. And then they have to have it in their database so that they know what kind of a license to issue you. So that is a good repository to find out who are the people who should not be on the voter rolls. And until the very last moment, that provision was in the law, that information would be shared. And then the ACLU got involved and said, you can't do that because what we think is going to happen is you're going to start outing illegals and we're going to lead to deportations and, lawsuits. And so at the last minute, and as I understand it, after the law was passed and before it was signed, they took that language out. So now it is forbidden for the Secretary of State to share that information with or the DMV to share that information with the Secretary of State. And as Donna said, there is a law going through the process now trying to reverse that. And let's support that law. Because the last iteration I read of that proposed law, it only required that be done once. That the DMV turn over its list to the Secretary of State to purge the roles as they currently exist. But there was nothing about perpetual sharing. So I'd like to see that law amended to say it's done every month, because we're getting people registering through the DMV every month. And then, of course, you've got that whole situation with the DMV registering people, whether they want to be registered or not, and that's going to cause a considerable number of non-citizens to be on the voter rolls. I mean, if you look at the process, it's going to cause that to happen because now we have an opt-out instead of an opt-in registration process, which means when you interact in any way with the Department of Motor Vehicles, they're supposed to put your stuff up on the Secretary of State's voter roll database and say, okay, you're now a registered voter. Now, they are supposed to say, are you eligible? They're supposed to ask you that. They're supposed to ask you if you want to declare a party preference. But now we are relying on good training, which Alex Padilla still has not put in place. Good training of the thousands and thousands and thousands of DMV clerks, and then not only making sure their training is accurate, but that they're supervising, making sure that they're following their training. Nothing could possibly go wrong with that, huh? I mean, I have a real problem with that. And that's another place I think we need to talk about observing. We need to observe that process as citizens out of the way and say, let me see what's happening at the DMV. Because in one place down in my county, I had a report from a lady who went to renew her driver's license, and the people in line in front of her, when they would get up to the counter, these were first-time licenses, and they were simply being told, until you go around to that other counter and use the computer to register to vote, I can't help you. They were forced, whether they were eligible or not, whether they were already registered or not. And so we obviously have a failure to communicate, and we always will when you have that many people involved in the process. In addition, you have legal and illegal immigrants here who may be less than fluent in English. And they will not understand what is said to them. They will not be able to read the paperwork given them. They will not know what they have to do to opt out of being registered. And one big concern that we have is this is going to hurt people who are on a legitimate path to citizenship, because they will get registered without their knowledge. And then when it's time for them to finally get their citizenship, the federal government will come in and say, you've committed a felony, you're registered to vote. And they will not only not get their citizenship, they likely will be deported. And it won't even be their fault. And I have, in doing some political walking around and talking to high propensity voters about my candidate, have knocked on doors and verified a person's name and said, okay, I'd like to talk to you about my candidate, and been told, I'm not a citizen, I can't vote. They had no idea they were registered and no idea they were a high propensity voter, which meant they had voted in at least the last 5 elections. So someone is voting in their name. And it's easy to do in California because of all this vote by mail. Because all somebody has to do is to re-register you. And we have uncovered all kinds of organizations that are doing this, where they go and they just re-register people down the street, re-register you. And what they change is the mailing address, so that you don't know that your mailing address has been changed. So everything from the registrar of voters office now goes to another mailing address. And we know that's happening on a large scale because our observers and the people reporting back to us who are working the polls are saying every election, the number of people who show up and say, I'm a vote by mail person, but I never got my ballot, is increasing hugely. And I want to know where all those ballots are going. Well, I don't know if the news reached up here, but in Los Angeles, we had an 87-year-old lady. The numbers are the same, but it's accurate. 87-year-old lady went out one morning, and there were 87 vote-by-mail ballots delivered to her front porch, each with a different name on it, but her address. And our biggest suspicion is that what happened was that those were supposed to have been addressed to one of those mailbox places, because we get contacted all the time by people who run those and say, how come I'm getting like 50 vote-by-mail ballots all delivered to this one mailbox? Because people are being re-registered without their knowledge, and then they're showing up at the polls and saying, I never got my ballot, so now I want to vote now. So they're going to vote provisionally. Chances are their ballot's been counted already because it's been mailed in, and signature match is nice. But as my registrar told me the last time I was with him, no fewer than 4 times, it's a subjective process. And the law clearly states that you must err liberally in favor of the voter when you're accepting or rejecting signatures. So we know that a lot of signatures are required to go through and be accepted that should not have been accepted, no matter how careful we try to be. Signature match is subjective. So we need a better process of knowing that the person who cast the ballot is the person who is entitled to cast the ballot. We've got to figure that out, whether we stay with vote by mail or we don't. But back to this presidential commission thing. There were 2 presidential commissions, the last of which was in 2005, and it was chaired by Jimmy Carter and James Baker III. And they, like the one before them, were tasked with looking at the vote-by-mail situation. And they concluded that mail ballots do not fulfill 5 major requirements of a fair and honest election. And yet, presidential commissions come out with this and say, this is what we've discovered, and it gets swept under the rug, and we start, and of course, the people who want the ability to manipulate an election will say, oh, good, then let's have more people vote by mail. And that's what's happened in California. So it started in 1998 when both parties enthusiastically decided to get rid of the absentee ballot and start the indiscriminate, whenever you want to, vote by mail process. And it's grown now to the situations where you have counties like the one that you just talked about that's in the 70% of people who are now voting by mail, and 70% of people who may or may not have their votes counted the way they wanted to because of all these other things that are going on. So we have a real concern about it. And we know that the people working in election offices and fields are doing their very best. We watch that happen. We know they're doing their best, but the manipulation is happening outside their purview. And it's too late by the time it gets to them. So those are some of our concerns, and I want to stop there because I want to see if you have any correct questions you want to ask me to direct me to other things.
Correct or otherwise, I don't know, but each county can purchase a copy of that county's database here in California. Is that, would it be to anybody's advantage for each county to do that and send it to the election committee, or?
When you have to qualify, you have to either be a candidate or you have to be an educational or a research organization in order to qualify to purchase them, right? But then once you've purchased them, you also sign I will not share this information, I will not send anywhere. So the only thing you could do is to give us the money it would cost and allow us to purchase them, because we're very, very strict about chain of custody. We can't take your voter rolls from you and then start working with them. The other problem there is that I can now buy the statewide voter database for $30. Right now, unfortunately, that's about what it's worth. It'll get better, but right now that's about what it's worth. But each county, some of them are exorbitant. It costs over $600 to buy LA. It costs over $450 to buy San Diego, and it costs 75 cents to buy San Francisco. That's legitimate, because the stuff is already there. The only cost involved is pushing a button and printing a disc. But these counties get to charge whatever they want to, and so it costs about $8,000 to buy them county by county statewide for the 58 counties. So it's been very financially prohibitive for us to be able to do as much research on the voter rolls as we would have wanted to do. And we have to buy them over and over again because they change. So we want to buy them every 2 or 3 months and update our research and continue with that, but that gets financially tough. Now, once the voter database that the Secretary of State has matured and it's a little bit more legitimate research tool, then it's legitimate to pay the $30, and we would be able to financially do that.
Obviously, it sounds like a flop. Our Secretary of State has this year to comply with some type of secured drop ballot system. Mm-hmm. Okay. Obviously, there's voter fraud, but I don't see anybody being prosecuted.
Oh, that's a good question. It is almost impossible to prove voter fraud because it's what we call it is the perfect crime. California has pretty much made it unprosecutable because the bar for proof is so high. You have to prove intent.
What a flop.
Okay? To prove intent, you have to prove what was in somebody's heart and mind when they did that. We had a lady in San Diego who made the front page because she had been voting with her deceased daughter's vote by mail ballot for 8 years in a row.
And Obama's from Nigeria.
She was not prosecuted. So I went and met with our prosecutor, and I said to our DA, I said, what are you thinking? Why did you not prosecute this lady? I can't prove intent. All she would have to do is get on that stand and say, well, they came to my house, I didn't know it was wrong, and that's enough to exonerate her. You cannot get a conviction because the bar is too high. We took, to Riverside County, we took stacks of affidavits that clearly have been filled out by the same individual with the same signature with different names on it, clearly a voter registration fraud scheme. And we said, here it is, here's all the evidence. And they looked at us and they had tears in their eyes. And they said, we can't prosecute this. Why not? Because we can't prove intent. And they can't waste taxpayer money prosecuting something they know will not get a conviction. So when people say to you, well, if there were any voter fraud, you'd be reading about all these convictions. No, you wouldn't. It's a very under the radar, easy to commit, and impossible to discover crime. And when you do finally see it, prosecuting it and convicting it is so impossible. But if you will go to Hans von Spakovsky's database that he is keeping, he has a large number of cases that have been convicted, so that when someone says, hey, there's no such thing as voter fraud, he can say, well, then what do you call this? So there are some that have been, but not anywhere near the number that there should be.
Okay. So at a stroke of a pen, we have to comply vehicles or businesses or comply to taxes. Why doesn't this state have to comply with a federal mandated secure voting system? And if we refuse to comply, our information on this investigation for voter fraud on the national level.
We received what was called a memorandum of agreement for all that amount of time, which meant that the DOJ, and remember who was the DOJ at that point, the DOJ agreed with the Secretary of State of California to give us a waiver, to give us longer to get this thing in place. But they gave us all the money to do it, and that money sat there, and then finally, The process started, they contracted with a company to make this database. They got 3/4 of the way through, and for no way that anybody can really explain, they just said, okay, that's it, stop. All the work went away, all the money went away, and we were back at ground zero again. When I started watching the debates for Secretary of State, when Alex Padilla was running for the office, it appeared to me that he had no idea what a statewide voter database was or what HAVA was. But by the end of that five series of debates, he was all on board. It's my first priority, we're gonna have that database done. So what happened was that we did contract to get that database made, and the state of California manipulated the requirements for whoever was gonna build that database so only one company could qualify. So it was a no bid, non-competitive process, and they handed the contract to the same company that built healthcare.gov. So you gotta wonder why I have a little doubt as to how effective this database is gonna be right away. So yeah, you lay those facts out and you're gonna say, wait a minute, where there's smoke, there's some sort of fire.
I apologize for taking so long. One more question. Is there any way that we could just TCAN all this and just start over with a voluntary voting system where we're regulated like the DMV, and people that want to volunteer to vote pay a registration fee to vote and become a registered voter?
No, that'd be back to the poll tax, and
Well, that wouldn't be a
we've
poll
gone
tax,
a
it'd be
long way to
voluntary.
make it, and Mr. Padilla and other people before him have talked quite a bit about, we want to make sure that voting is accessible to everybody regardless of their circumstances, and we certainly would not want to stand in the way of that. Every person who has a legitimate right to vote should be able to vote and register to vote in the most convenient way possible. But prior to this AB 1461 new motor voter law, it couldn't have been easier to register to vote. Seriously, could not have been easier to register to vote. And talking about getting illegals on the voter database, that started with the National Voter Registration Act in 1994, because what they did is said, here's a little box, check it off. I'm a citizen, I'm not a citizen. If you check, I'm a citizen, that's it, you're a citizen. They take your word for it. No checking, because there's really no database against which they can make that check, right? If you check, no, I'm not a citizen, they are required to send you a card that says, are you sure? You want to change your mind? If you leave both boxes blank, the default is he's a citizen.
Oh, right. That's really cool.
And we have found actual affidavits that say, no, I'm not a citizen. Check right off there by that person, and those people are registered and on the voter database. So yeah, there's a lot of non-citizen on the database, and there will be more and more as this AB 1461 gets implemented. No question about that.
Well, this is probably a dumb question because I happen to think I know the answer to it. But my question is, if it turns out there is massive voter harvesting is the term that you used, is there any authority or ability of the federal government, if they're able to prove it, to decertify a state's vote from a national election, especially a presidential election?
We want to be really careful about putting federal hands on elections, because this is a states' rights issue. And the reason that our elections are not as hackable from outside, I mean, President Obama was correct in saying it's almost impossible for a foreign entity to come in and hack our elections because they're so decentralized, they're all over the place. It's almost impossible to do. Now, any one individual can figure out a way to hack a local election and have a local impact on your local people.
Right.
But for somebody to come in and hack a presidential election is absolutely impossible because of the way it's done. You don't want to federalize an election. That would be the worst direction in the world to go. Now, more to your question, I have no idea. I do know that some of the states back east, North Carolina being one of them, at least floated the suggestion, and also Judicial Watch published a paper floating the suggestion that since California has passed the new motor voter law, AB 1461, that their electoral college votes should not count because there is no way to certify that our election was fair and honest. I don't know whether anybody can legally do that, but I do know that it's popped up in the minds of some people in other states, yeah.
Okay.
Any more questions?
Back here.
Yes.
Has Election Integrity Project given any thought to class action lawsuit on behalf of legitimate voters going after these counties that have more votes cast than eligible voters? We in the north, there's really no reason for us in Sutter County to vote at all, except for local elections, because our votes are wiped out by just San Francisco or LA or San Diego.
Well, my message is always, I don't want to depress people with some of the things I say, because I still believe that legitimate voters can get out and outvote the fraud that's out there. And I think that's one of the things that happened in this last election. You need to get out and outvote that fraud. You know, you need to get out there and vote legitimately, and the fraudulent votes that are cast, they may miscalculate how many they need. I think if you heard the story that came back all the way back from Kennedy's election, where his father said, "How many votes do you need? I'm not going to pay for a landslide." And that was said, you know, whatever that meant. So we're not a legal organization. We're a research and educational organization. What our hope was that if we were to find things that would then support a legal action, that we could hand it off to organizations that do that sort of thing, and they would take it from there. That's another place where that hasn't been happening. However, we have now been contacted by a couple of national organizations that do that sort of thing, and they're very interested in what we have. The way that works with the voter database, though, is that you have to file a legal letter with the state saying you have 90 days to clean up your act, and if you don't clean up your act in 90 days, then we'll file suit. You can't just file the suit. You have to warn them and give them a chance to fix it. And then you have to take a look and see if they fixed it, and then if they didn't fix it, then you can file the suit. The way the National Voter Registration Act is written, every citizen in the United States has standing to file that lawsuit. But a lot of the things that Election Integrity Project is finding going wrong on Election Day and during the election season is something that violates the Help America Vote Act, which we don't have standing. That has to be the Department of Justice that has to take that on. So it is our hope, too, to get our research to the Department of Justice and say, take a look at what's going on here. Okay. Every county needs to create teams of observers who will get out on Election Day or any part of the election season where voting is happening. So when it's happening in person at the registrar's office, go down there and be an observer. If it's happening at a vote center, get out to the vote center and be an observer. Make sure the laws are being followed, which means you need to be trained by us first. We will give you everything you need to look for and everything to do if things are going wrong. One of the things I like the most about our program is that we are just not writing incident reports and then, you know, telling everybody what happened that was bad. The major purpose we are out there is to get those things resolved at the moment they happen so that it stops happening and the rest of the voters for the rest of the day are protected because a procedure has been corrected. And so we have a hotline. We work with the registrar's offices. They have a hotline we can call. So my observers call me, I call the registrar's hotline, and 5 minutes later, they call or send someone out to the poll in question, and it gets fixed. So I like how that works when it works about our program, because we're not trying to publish a paper and say all these things went wrong. That's not what we're about. We're about making sure it's happening right on Election Day or during election season when votes are being cast and when votes are being counted. And we do want to do that in cooperation with the election officials. Because, you know, like in my county, we have well over 3,000 poll workers. LA's got over 6,000 poll workers, 9,000 poll workers. You can't quality control that number of people from a central office, which is why eyes and ears of each and every one of you who care about the integrity of the election need to be out there, making sure that you're helping that to happen. The Secretary of State sends observers out on Election Day to check out things. And this last election, he sent out 49 observers for 58 states. 49 observers. And put out a big glowing report about how everything was so hunky-dory. We sent out considerably more observers, and our report didn't look like his. And one of the reasons why, and why we met with the Secretary of State to say, how come your report and our report are so different? Not only because the number of people that were out there to really cover the bases, but also the fact of what you were asked to look for. And the Secretary of State's observers were asked to look for, are people happy? Are they coming out having a good time? Is it an enjoyable experience? Did they have a place to park? There was not one law they were looking for to say, is the law being enforced? Are people voting lawfully, legally, privately? Are their rights being infringed upon? No, they weren't looking for that at all. That's what we look for. Are you casting the vote you're entitled to cast, which is uninfluenced, private, and as much as possible, you're casting the vote you're entitled to. That's what we look for, and so there's a big difference. We need, if you go with a vote center model in your county, then we need to train you differently to know what to look for in the vote center. We'll have to work with the registrars to say, what are we looking for, and how can we observe, and how can we stay out of the way? What can we do? But we need to train teams to do that. We need trained teams to go and watch the signature verification process and make sure that things are being legitimately looked at. We've had to slow people down because we have people, they're looking at 4 signatures compared on a screen at one time, and they were going, whew, 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 whew. There's no way you can do it that fast, even if you're a speed reader. So we were able to say, wait a minute, we would like to ask you to require your people to slow down and to look at each signature pair at least 3 seconds each so that we can have a more legitimate match, and they have to do that. So this is the kind of thing where we need boots on the ground everywhere. And in order to do that, we need a couple of people to step up and say, I'll coordinate my community, not my whole county, just my community. And we will work with you, we will train you, we will help you, give you everything that you need. But we need you to step up and say, I'll at least be willing to listen to what you need, and then I'll let you know whether I can be part of that. So I did not bring an official sign-up sheet, but I would ask you, please either give me a business card or come sign a piece of paper that I have with your name and your contact information that you are interested at least finding out how you can help to rebuild the teams in your counties. Okay? Thank you so much.